My name is Penny Rankin. I'm president of the National Council of Women of Canada, and I'm absolutely delighted that you've been patient and that you have joined us this morning and this afternoon for those of us that are in the East to join us in this online and important conversation. Before we begin, I ask that you mute yourself. So I have a few housekeeping issues to bring to your attention. Please remain muted throughout the whole presentation. If, and I'm sure you will, have questions or comments, we invite you to type them into the chat at any time, and I will be moderating a Q&A after our speakers have finished their presentations. Our aim is to try and keep this to 1 hour if possible, and if people are interested in staying on longer, that is a possibility as well. Please note that the event itself is being recorded, and the recording will be posted on our website shortly, as indeed are many of our events, previous events, and I invite you to, peruse them at your convenience. Every one of you who has registered, whether you attended today or not in person, will receive a link by email in the coming days, likely next week. And in that follow-up email, you'll receive a link also to our open letter. More on that as we proceed with the event today. But it's an open letter that addresses much of what will be discussed. You'll also be given an opportunity to join the council if that is of interest to you, and I hope it is for those of you who aren't already members, as well as to sign up for various mailings, including our newsletter. Before, though, however, I pass the mic on, I will begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands in Canada that are the home of many Indigenous communities who have held relationships with this land for generations. We thank them for sharing their land and waters with us and recognize the historical and ongoing legacy of colonialism and the ill treatment of them over the years. We'll strive to make this acknowledgement a reality, not only in our words, but in our actions to address the harm done in the past. It's now my pleasure to introduce a valued and semi-new member of our team, Shannon Kelly-Scharf. I use the term semi-new because she's returning, having worked alongside of us last summer, and she's now providing much appreciated administrative support. Shannon, I honestly cannot say or stress how delighted we are to have you with us, and I now invite you to introduce our speakers. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Penny, for the introduction. I am grateful to be back again this year, supported through wage funding, assisting Penny, our president, over the coming months. And without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our two guest speakers who have graciously taken the time to be with us today and share important insights on our health in relation to national drinking water standards that are still not in place in Canada. Today, we will hear from two outstanding speakers, advocate and author Susan Blacklin and Meg Sears, chair of Prevent Cancer Now. Their discussion will focus on the water quality, governance, and the health impacts when systems fail. Susan Blacklin's first memoir, Water Confidential: Witnessing Justice Denied, The Fight for Safe Drinking Water in Indigenous Rural Communities in Canada, was selected by Congress of Humanities and is now included in Indigenous Studies curriculum in universities across Canada. It was also selected by the BC Department of Education for Social Studies and Science curriculum in grades 10 through 12. Susan's second book, Call to Action: Water Justice: What You Don't Know Could Kill You, is the result of readers of Water Confidential, reaching out to her with present-day concerns in towns and cities across Canada. In this book, Susan is the messenger sharing present-day concerns identified by experts' research, concerns, and recommendations. Susan co-founded the Safe Drinking Water Foundation and has volunteered tirelessly to help First Nation communities in their quest for truly safe drinking water. Susan now lives in Qualcomm Beach on Vancouver Island and is a proud member of the National Council of Women of Canada. Meg Sears has advanced environmental health for decades, and as chair of Prevent Cancer Now, she works to, quote, make least toxic the norm, end quote. She was trained in chemical engineering and applied chemistry at University of Toronto and biochemical engineering at McGill, and has diverse laboratory experience including energy research. With skills in scientific analysis and writing, she later gained associations with medical researchers. Some highlights include the medical perspective on environmental sensitivities for the Canadian Human Rights Commission, leading to a policy under the Canadian Human Rights Act, a CIHR and SSHRC funded review of environmental, public health, and medical approaches for toxic elements. 3 guidance documents addressing toxicants, indoor environments, and COVID-19 with the Canadian Committee on Indoor Air Quality, and rich collaborations with Canadian environmental health and policy organizations. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Susan and Meg.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Crystal clear or cloudy, you may think pertains to drinking water, but today we delve into the somewhat murky handling of science by our governments responsible for protecting our health. Today's session has only been made a reality because of the extreme passion and efforts of Penny Rankin, President of National Council of Women of Canada, and one of the busiest women I've ever had the pleasure to meet. And thank you, Penny, for all that you do. I am thrilled to welcome Meg Sears, Chair of Prevent Cancer Now, to join us today. I've told everyone I am the messenger. I share the work of experts in my book, Water Justice. When Meg and I first began chatting to prepare for today, I knew Meg was an expert on asbestos cement water pipes. What I learned was that she has been involved in so many more issues and that our very different journeys have taken us to similar places. I met Dr. David Schindler in 1981 when he directed the experimental lakes area, launching his career. He made significant contributions to banning phosphates in detergents, to stop the eutrophication of lakes. Dave was not afraid to address uncomfortable environmental implications of industry. He was also chairman of the Safe Drinking Water Foundation, founded by my ex-late husband, Dr. Hans Peterson. They both worked tirelessly for the Indigenous communities in northern Alberta, often alongside another SDWF board member, Dr. John O'Connor, who I'm very pleased is participating in the webinar today. He was raising awareness of the terrible cancers plaguing First Nation communities. They were his patients. Meg, would you like to say a few things about your knowledge of water and your experiences in northern Alberta?
Certainly. Thank you very much. I just have to mention that with this view, I don't have access to all of my notes that I had prepared, but I put so much work into them. I hope that it all works out just fine. Yes, I actually haven't been to Fort Mackay where Dr. O'Connor was working, but I would say that there's a lot of there's a tremendous amount of pollution from the bitumen, and the tailings ponds have been polluting the Athabasca River. The cancers that we're seeing at Fort Mackay of the liver and so on are well known to be associated with the bitumen emissions, with the naphthenic acids, which are that's the chemical that the regulators are putting a lot of attention to. But this is very, very complex materials. There are also toxic metals in them. There's arsenic, there's lead, and these are getting into the fish. There's contamination of fish. And I think we should actually advance the slide, please. And so is that how there we go. So we have a huge problem in northern Alberta, which is actually getting worse right now because because we've got such a vast increase in the tar ponds, and the federal government has recently agreed that rather than keeping the water until it goes through the ground, the water in the ponds, that after a period of time with the sand, very fine sand percolating or settling, that the surface water of the ponds can actually be discharged back into the river. And that's the first time that we've ever done this. Could we move on? I want to share now.
I think you were going to mention too, Meg, about the sensitivities from the cancers, the child development and so forth.
That's true. Actually, these chemicals, they affect different, they affect people depending upon when the exposure is. So if the exposure is basically in utero, then you can have permanent lifelong effects on the development of the children. Children who are experiencing these exposures at a young age, they're learning, their mental development is affected, and they also are more likely to have obesity and develop chronic diseases and cancers. And then later on in life, you start to see more of these chronic diseases and cancers. But what we realize now with research that is just emerging is that these changes, this obesity, what is called a cancer phenotype actually, is the result of changes, can result from changes not to the DNA, but to the what is kind of holding together the DNA and affects its expression. So we now realize that the exposure of the mother, even before conception, can predispose the next generation to the same kind of developmental and metabolic problems and propensity to develop cancer. And recent research shows that 20 generations of mice were exposed at the beginning of the long experiment, and that this propensity, these epigenetic changes, persisted for 20 generations. So that's a huge impact. We're actually affecting future generations with today's pollution.
You were also talking about how the oil industry is minimizing its liability for ongoing pollution of the ponds.
Yes, well, it's they're actually making an arrangement along with the ability to drain some of this water directly into the Athabasca River, that along with the exit of the water, basically, they are not going to be responsible for this, for these facilities and for the long-term impacts. So they're being absolved of this responsibility by the present federal government. Which
I think sorry.
If somebody's going to be paying for healthcare for these people and so on, then that's going to land on the rest of society.
And I think as well, what really hit home to me was when you told me about the number of children entering kindergarten who were averbal. And so it's not just the healthcare, but the education system that's going to be so stretched and stressed by catering to these kids and trying to help them become the best they can be.
That's right. That was actually seen in further north, it was seen in the Peace River district, where a novel way of extracting bitumen was leading to very high levels of pollution in the river, in the river valley, particularly during the winter when there was a strong inversion overnight, and these fumes would collect. And so there was one person I met who was a physio. She said that she was working with somebody who had terrible back problems because she was spending so much time with these very young children sitting on these little kindergarten chairs. And in one school, 11 children had gone to school in kindergarten and were still averbal, which is astounding because the parents were getting very severe chemical sensitivities. They weren't even able to care for their children, and their children were really requiring extraordinary care.
It's really quite shattering to learn. So this slide that we have now, I believe, is slide 4, and that's good to hold for this next few comments. One issue that frustrated all scientists that I met was how government funded scientific research but never acted on it or heeded the results. It seems that is still the case today. I searched to find a case of research being applied to either improve the efficacy of water treatment or wastewater treatment, or to improve source water protection, with no success. I did find, though, through a Freedom of Information, that the Canada Water Agency was founded on the principle not to delve into the First Nations water crisis. The actual statement reads, "Considerations for the development of the CWA will not encompass safe drinking water on reserves, given that it is a pre-existing commitment by the federal government." I suggest it's a pre-existing shame, but I also refer to the advanced research by Sébastien Sauvé, a scientist in Montreal, who found at least 50 different types of pesticides were detected in tap water. When a scientist of his caliber then suggests that instead of panicking, the public should ask elected officials to provide safe drinking water, I ask, when will the government use science instead of abusing science? So Meg, could you talk about your experiences as a scientist researching various issues related to safe drinking water? Was your research acted upon or that of your peers?
Well, that's a really good question, because sometimes one person's research is part of a big puzzle. And so when you get all these puzzle pieces, it's easy to say, oh, well, you know, that's from last week's puzzle or something. And so it's true that a lot of the time it takes quite a while for all of these small studies to be linked up. And what can happen, and this is what we do with Prevent Cancer Now, is we say, well, you know, we've got this evidence that this particular pesticide is mobile, and this particular chemical has these properties. And then another chemical, which seems to be along with it a lot of the time, has other properties that kind of can be amplified or somehow made more prominent. One example might be that glyphosate, the well-known herbicide, is it's actually a chelator, which means it can wrap itself around metal ions such as lead or cadmium, which we know are in Canadian soils, and it mobilizes them so they go into the plants. And this is all through the water. And so Canadian commodities have actually been turned around from the EU for having too much toxic metals in them, because we just happen to have a lot of higher levels of these metals in our soils, in the prairies, and also in our potash fertilizer. And another property of the same chemical is that it's an antimicrobial. And that's why it interferes with the human gut microbiome, but it also interferes with the microbiome of the soil. So this is just an amazing sequence, but the glyphosate affects the microbiome of the soil. The microbiome of the soil includes microbes which are pathogens for grasshoppers. And so there's research showing that grasshopper infestations are worse where glyphosate is sprayed. And like every single step of those connections exists in research, some of which is from Canada, it's Canadian research. And yet, do you think that at Health Canada that they say, oh, I wonder what the effects of pesticides are on pest infestations? And this is a huge, there's innumerable instances where there are very important commercial and public health and environmental health issues, which we know about, but nobody pulls these puzzle pieces together. And when it comes to the numbers of pesticides in drinking water, yes, in Europe, they have a total limit, like on how much pesticides can be in water, whereas in Canada, as long as one pesticide is not over a limit for the pesticide, then it's okay. So we can if we had 30 pesticides all at their limit, we'd be vastly over the cap that is given that is imposed in Europe. So there's different ways of looking at the science, in that can be fragmented, but you can also be fragmented in how you're imposing limits and protecting public health. And the environment is one thing, it's all interactive, and we have to be treating that in a more comprehensive fashion.
So if you can move to the next slide there, please, Shannon. And the other point I think that you wanted to make there, Meg, is with climate change, as we get more droughts, as we get less water, the pollutants in the water, to my way of thinking, are going to be either remaining or increasing. Therefore, the ratio of pollutants is going to be more severe. Would you like to talk more about that? Because I think you had some thoughts on it.
Yes, well, certainly, people have said for decades, the solution to pollution is dilution. So if you have less water, then obviously the pollutants are going to be more concentrated. And that's important both for water on the landscape, and it's also important for sewage, that as we if we have more sewage and less water, we have to be able to recycle and to reclaim and not to pollute in the first place. So there's no away, in quotes, that when you're talking about pollution, it doesn't just go away. It may go into the ground, it may go into the soil, it may go into your food or your water or into the air, and it may come down somewhere else in the rain.
So you were mentioning that Canada is the only country that does not have drinking water regulations out of the G7 countries. And while Europe has much more stringent regulations for pesticides, Prime Minister Carney recently proposed that he would eliminate the current 5-year pesticide registration renewal process, which are changes that would dramatically reduce oversight of pesticide safety. And here in BC, we've got Premier Eby still insisting on spraying all of our forests with glyphosate.
Yes, that's coming back. What's really worrisome is that in the budget bill now, there's a proposal that has to do with pesticide assessment as well. And basically, they want to add a new, and I just found out about this, they want to add another consideration to the suite of things you have to think about when you're registering a pesticide. And up until now, Health Canada has kind of stuck to its sphere of competencies and has dealt with, environmental and public health and whether or not a pesticide actually works. And now the pesticide companies have convinced this federal government that they should add to this suite of considerations whether or not this is going to pose an economic hardship to stop using a particular pesticide. Well, like, how on earth are you going to do that kind of consideration? Economic hardship is going to be determined by the price of the pesticide that the pesticide companies have imposed. But what about the economic hardship of public health? What about the economic hardship associated with cancers to society and to individuals? And the other thing is that they are going to say that if the pesticide companies don't like a decision, they can go to the cabinet and have them reverse it. So as long as it doesn't affect public health, if it's some kind of environmental concern, then these MPs who have no competencies at all in pesticides are going to be overturning the decision of a regulator. And that's it in consideration right now. So if you don't like that idea, then it would be a good idea to let your MPs know.
Pretty scary. Thanks, Meg. If you can move to the next slide, Shannon, thanks. This was the regulations in Europe, and I'm going to let Meg explain this because I only know that it's better to have a limit of 5 rather than 1 when it comes to multiple pesticides. Please, Meg, you can explain this slide.
Well, the way it works in England and Wales is that if you've got 5 pesticides and they're all at different concentrations, say in water, that you take all of those pesticide concentrations and add them up, and that must be less than 0.5 microgram per liter. And it's got limits because some pesticides are more potent than others, but nevertheless, they've got a cap on, for all the pesticides, you can't have any more than this 0.5 microgram per liter. Whereas in Canada, they individual pesticides are in water. They're actually, a lot of them are capped at about 0.1 microgram per liter. But you can have a dozen pesticides or a large number of pesticides in a drinking water sample, as you mentioned already, Susan. And so if you've got 10 pesticides there at 0.1, then you've already got up to 1 microgram per liter. So it's a different way of calculating, and it's just obviously not as good because the more pesticides you have, the more you're allowed to pollute.
And the more they interact and the more they accumulate, the more dangerous they become. And so I want to make sure that the participants here today realize that Sebastian's research was not in a small rural community of 300 population. Sebastian's research was in the center of Montreal, one of Canada's biggest cities. And he found over 50 pesticides in the tap water, some of them at higher levels than were in the source waters. So very, very scary stuff. You can move to the next slide, please, Shannon. When the world has been declared water bankrupt, the fact that Canada has an abundance of source waters should, in my mind, make the need to protect those source waters a top priority. It used to be that the biggest threat to any water supply was sewage. Sorry, move to the next slide as well now, please.
Mm-hmm.
The Thames water treatment in the UK serves 16 million residents. Winnipeg, Manitoba serves 936,000 residents, less than 1 million, 116. Winnipeg dumps an average of 10 billion litres of sewage into the rivers every year. Thames water treatment dumps an average of 12.2 billion litres annually in the Thames, with 16 times the population. Now, Winnipeg is not alone. From Goderich, Ontario to Saanich, BC, and many, many communities in between, I suggest there isn't a community in Canada who are not challenged by what to do with increasing amounts of sewage. Meg, I'm sure you've got some experiences to share about sewage in Canada.
Yes, well, let's back up just a little bit because certainly there are very large volumes of sewage, but Canadians also use a heck of a lot more water than they use in UK. We have less efficient toilets, we have less efficient washing machines, etc. So we tend to be very wasteful, actually. It's quite impressive going to the UK and seeing how they manage things. So that's kind of the first thing is the sheer volume of sewage versus the amount of contamination that you're dealing with. And so in Canada, we can certainly do a lot better with our efficiencies in water use, in energy use, in various other ways. But there are also different ways that you can treat sewage. And as climate change progresses, as we become, larger populations and so on, it's going to be more and more important to actually reuse water. So that's something we're not good at all. They're much better at it in places where they don't have as much water. We're very water rich. And this is a shift that society is going to have to make in terms of its choices of technologies, its how good our water reuse is, and so on. It's also this whole efficiency of water use is something that is very important if we want to go back to the Athabasca, because there's a lot of water that is simply used once and then put back into a tailings pond and then leached down into the Athabasca River and tributaries. So across the board, we have really taken water for granted, and we're going to have to be rethinking a lot of what we do, partly because of the pollution and partly because of water supplies.
One of the things you suggested was that the petroleum industry is using fresh water to extract bitumen rather than recycling sewage treatment. And
well, no, I don't think there'd be a lot of sewage treatment water readily available in northern Alberta. It's quite remote, but they should be able to reuse the water rather than using it once and then putting it into a settling pond and taking clean water out of the river.
Next slide, please, Shannon. Meg, this is all yours.
Yeah, so here are some examples that, so first of all, we don't want to have POPs. That means persistent organic pollutants. We know that a lot of chemicals that we use, things that we put in our plastics, in our goods and so on, they are made to last. And that, my grandmother said that something that lasted was a really good thing. But we now realize that there are persistent organic pollutants that just build up over time. And we know a lot more now. We can make much better choices. A lot of our problems are the result of economically easy choices made by people who are producing the things that we buy in the stores, and our governments have to stand up for that. So we need to be able to have a recycling economy and recycling ways of life. We have to maintain this natural water quality. We have to protect our wetlands and our natural features. Mother Nature is way better at looking after water than we are, that's for sure. And this will also support biodiversity and keep our lands somewhat cooler. And of course, as we talked about, the efficiencies for toilets and appliances and washers, and it's important to dry clothes naturally. Like, really, I've got a dryer that I've used probably maybe once every couple of years when and we have to really minimize the chemicals that we're putting down the drain, such as Some fragrances actually are quite persistent, and a lot of them are endocrine disruptors, so they affect the way our hormones work in our bodies, and these can lead to developmental problems and cancers as well. And so we can make cleaner and better choices at the grocery store. And we also have to be telling the people who are making these products, look, we want the simple, clean products. We can use gray water for gardening, and ideally the household or industrial wastewater should be able to go back into the lake if we're doing a good job of it.
Thanks, Meg. Yes, the next slide. It's a very cute chick. Not such a cute message, okay?
No.
Backyard chicken eggs, that's the free-range chickens that have been running in farms throughout the Netherlands, have now been banned in February this year. They are no longer allowed to be sold or to be purchased because the eggs are laden with PFAs. Meg, what is the science telling you about PFAs?
Yes, these are polyfluorinated aromatic substances, which I will unpack a little bit. It used to be, we heard about dioxins and all these chlorinated chemicals that were so, harmful and so on. And chlorine was added to chemicals to make them more persistent or more potent. And so we figured out that that was bad. And then if you look at the periodic chart, the next smallest version of chlorine is fluorine. And actually the carbon-fluorine bond is very strong. And chemists had a lot of trouble for quite a while adding fluorine to carbon things. But then they figured it out. And so if the chlorinated chemicals were bad, well, this is the chlorinated chemicals on steroids with the fluorine replacing it. But since it was different, the chemical companies convinced our government, who obviously had never taken a chemistry lesson, that, oh, well, we don't really know. And so we'll let it, we'll do some research. But in the meantime, let's just put this all on the market. So these perfluorinated chemicals, they're waterproof, they're oil-proof, they are flame-proof, they're quite persistent. And they, first of all, we had Teflon and so on, but then they got really good at it. So these fluorinated chemicals are in all of the newest drugs, and they're in all the newest pesticides. And they all, every time they make one of these things, those molecules can break down and they can form the simplest PFAS, which is called trifluoroacetate, or TFA. And you're going to be hearing a lot about TFA in the news and so on, because that was at one point considered to be toxic, and it was on the list of PFAS that were being banned in Canada. And then with the present government, suddenly they were vanished. The PFAS list no longer covered TFA. So they did a big backtrack there, which makes a huge difference to the portfolios of chemicals. Right now, we're going to court over a couple of new pesticides that are PFASticides, some people are calling them. But this is a new kind of chemistry. It is being promoted and spread around and sold with great enthusiasm. And we're just repeating the same kind of bad playbook that has already harmed us. And so I think we've got to try to go back and to simpler chemicals and include all of the PFAS, because this type of chemical is innately going to be bad. It's not something that Mother Nature or our bodies have the chemical ability to deal with. Our enzymes did not develop with PFAS.
Okay, thanks, Meg. The next slide, please, Shannon, speaks even more to PFAs. Moose Jaw is home to the Canadian Armed Forces Base, the home of the Snowbirds, 1,000 active military service members, and many of these people have linked their serious, sometimes fatal health issues like cancers to their working conditions. When I mentioned this to Meg, what really shocked me was Meg's response that maybe the PFAs are the least of their problems. So, Meg, I'd like you to explain to people what you explained to me about pilots and the military people and what they are exposed to and what they are struggling with health-wise.
Yes. I actually flew gliders at one point. I love pilots. I think that flying is amazing. And so, and I've hung around with pilots and have a world of respect for them. And so, you've probably heard about the kinds of things that PFAS is used for. It's very water repellent. And so it's used for de-icing. And it also is it doesn't burn, and it's really good for firefighting foams. And so these are two major uses. They're known to be toxic, so they're reserved for the most urgent, high important,
most challenging.
most challenging situations. And there's nothing much more challenging than putting out fires on airplanes. So these chemicals are really at high concentrations in the groundwater, and they can be actually put into the air as well. At CFB Moose Jaw, there's an administrative building that is connected with the aerodrome and the hangar, where they do a lot of maintenance and so on. And that is also the ground under that is contaminated. So, we've got all of these chemicals, not only the PFAS, but the solvents and the fuels and so on that are used in maintenance of these aircraft that are in the soils and so on. But the other thing that we realize now is that we've got a lot of IT in our wars, and so all of the radar is radio frequency radiation, and this is also very it's biologically active, and the radar can actually amplify other toxic reactions within the body. There is something called microwave catalysis that speeds up chemical reactions. So there's interactions possible between the radio frequency exposures and the chemical exposures, but there's quite a soup, and the pilots are being affected, the maintenance crew are being affected, and also the people in the administrative building, they're being affected. So actually, one of our board members used to work there. She has a neurological condition now as a result of the exposures at CFB Moose Jaw, and she's going to be receiving an award in a few weeks from the federal government for her work helping out people who have been injured, not in war, but in preparation or just standing on guard for us. And we can't afford to be doing that. We don't want, to be harming our military. So there's a bit of there's a collection of issues with the military bases, and PFAS is certainly featuring in that.
I'm very cognizant of the time, and I know we had a late start, but I imagine people have places to go. So I'm going to skip our section on AI and ask Shannon if you can move to slide 14. Yes, this is it. Julian Branch is a board member of Prevent Cancer Now. He was one of the readers of Water Confidential who reached out and contacted me. And that's why we now have Meg here today speaking to you. So Meg's top priority in Prevent Cancer Now, as chair of the organization, is the asbestos cement water pipes, of which there are now almost 14,000 reported across Canada, potentially 20,000 kilometers or more, as only about 2/3 of communities reported the data. So Meg, this is your baby. This is what you know inside out. Would you like to tell people as much as you can about asbestos cement water pipes?
Well, that's a big, open, generous invitation. Thank
Yeah, and we
Thank
don't
you,
have a lot of
Susan.
time.
I'll try to hit the high points here. Yes,
Mm.
well, Canada provided about 40% of the asbestos globally. We were a big producer of asbestos, and at one point, we had a growing population, and pipes that were made with cement that was reinforced just with fibrous asbestos. They were lighter and they were stronger, and they were installed all over the place. And some parts of Canada have very large quantities of these. For instance, Regina and Winnipeg both have more than their fair share of asbestos water pipes. Well, that was quite a long time ago, and these pipes have definitely reached the end of their lifetime. So they are degrading and they're breaking very, very frequently. Now, in Canada, with all of the asbestos we were producing, we were very slow to recognize that asbestos could be harmful, but eventually we did recognize that breathing asbestos was bad. But Health Canada has, we're waiting now on possible change of tune because they did a consultation in the spring. But Health Canada to date has said that there's no consistent, convincing evidence that drinking asbestos is bad for you. And this is, first of all, an extraordinary level of certainty, consistent and convincing evidence. And it's made even more difficult to produce that because we have no methodology, we have no data on asbestos in our drinking water. So how on God's green earth are we ever going to get any kind of proof that drinking asbestos is bad for you if we never measure asbestos in drinking water? Nevertheless, Health Canada has recently concluded another consultation on this. But we realize now that not only are people being exposed to asbestos, in Canada, we see very rapidly growing rates of colorectal and gastrointestinal cancers, which have been linked to breathing asbestos. And so far, I would say that drinking asbestos should be, pretty high on the list of suspects. So we have no consistent, convincing evidence. We have no laboratory that will measure asbestos in drinking water in Canada because it's a bit of a specialized thing. So any samples would have to go to the States. And so on the basis of no evidence, then we've come to this conclusion. So what are we going to be doing about it? And obviously, at some point, these pipes are going to have to be replaced. What happened in Regina just a couple of weeks ago was that Julian had convinced them that they should revisit this issue and that they should increase their rapidity of the replacements because they were aiming to replace 10 kilometers per year, and they have 500 kilometers of pipe. So this wasn't really adding up. So there was a motion to increase their ambition in pipe replacement, at which point the administration was told that actually we haven't been able to keep up with our previous ambitions regarding pipe replacement because all of our efforts are going into pipe repair. These pipes are breaking catastrophically. They're creating all sorts of floods. And so all of our budget is being used up in emergency response, and they can't get ahead of the problem. And so we're realizing now that this is an even more more of an emergency because it's just, we're spiraling, we're kind of circling the drain on this issue. But certainly there's very good evidence that drinking asbestos is not a good idea. These pipes should be replaced urgently, and we should be able to measure asbestos in drinking water in Canada and collect some kind of data.
There's two things I'd like to sort of prompt you on here, Meg. First of all, is that although Canada says drinking the water with asbestos does not produce cancer, they have agreed to the same standard as in the US. In the US, they decided that drinking water from asbestos cement pipes did cause cancer since 1992, and they have set the limit as 7 million fibers per litre. Canada has adopted that same standard and yet says it doesn't cause cancer. So I find that contradictory. But then we have a number of communities, my own where I live in Qualicum Beach is one of them, where they have chosen to leave these pipes in the ground, which I feel is creating toxic waste sites. Could you expand on that and verify if you have concern about these pipes being left in the ground, Meg?
Certainly. Actually, Canada does not. Canada refers to the US standard, but we have
Okay.
no limit for asbestos
Okay.
in drinking water. There's nothing enforceable whatsoever in Canada. You could be eating asbestos soup and that would be fine.
Sorry, it's just a guideline, right?
Yes, well, there's no guideline in Canada. So there is a
Okay.
consultation going out that's out right now. Well, the consultation's finished, but we're waiting the final decision. So it's kind of still in play at Health Canada. And yes, we do have regulations about asbestos. And so if you leave asbestos pipes in the ground, then that's a risk because somebody else could come and dig them up and be exposed to asbestos dust. And we do pay attention to asbestos dust. So any pipe replacement should include the removal of the pipes so that you don't create what would be considered a toxic waste site in the middle of your road. There is a technology is called trenchless pipe replacement, which is an underground thing. It's quite clever that is patented in Canada and was being promoted in the US. And it seems to have vanished off the face of the earth. The patent is there, but nobody is advancing that right now. It could be a very good way because it is fast. It doesn't require you to dig up the entire road. And there is a waste disposal mechanism associated with it. But that seems to have faded into the background. I have no idea what happened to that technology right now.
Yeah, there was also the issue of sediment, how they claim that there's sediment left in people's taps after these pipes have been maintained and people should flush their taps for 1 or 2 hours or whatever.
Well, actually, there's in a lot of places, the sediment is actually asbestos. We know it's asbestos, and it actually is clogged drains and clogged pipes. And in some places around the world, they are actually trying much harder to replace the pipes. But every time one country gets to the point where they say, oh, these pipes are a really big problem, we should be replacing them. That's the stage at which they're accelerating in their self-destruction. So it's a really nasty kind of problem to try to tackle. And it's very, very expensive and disruptive.
I think it's interesting to know.
Sorry, just for one moment. I'd like to interrupt, and this is so extraordinary. But if people are able to stay on, and if our brilliant guests can stay on, I'm happy to continue with the conversation because I think it is so extremely important. But I do want to remind everybody that it is being recorded. So if you do have to leave, and I hope you don't, but if you do have to leave, you will get the full recording. So Meg and Susan, if you're happy to carry on with this disturbing conversation, I'm just wanted to give everybody that opportunity.
Thank you, Penny. I think it's interesting to note that the 3 countries that are leading the way on removing and accelerating the removal of these asbestos pipes, one of them is Scotland, which of course with the EU, that's not really surprising. But the other 2 countries are Kenya and Malaysia.
Yep.
Now, I shake my head at Canada being so backward when we're looking to Kenya and Malaysia to lead us in this area. The other issue that I have with this is where they test for the asbestos in the water, because our community has a loop system So the loop runs the water all around the community. If they have an asbestos break in the northeast corner, they might take a sample from where the water just comes in from the water treatment system and say, oh, but it's fine. They should be testing the water from the tap of the nearest resident where that break happened to truly assess the number of asbestos fibers in their water. And I did see a question coming up. If we go to the next slide there's, I believe, two. Oh yeah, sorry, this one first. So it's not just government who need to take their heads out of the sand. It's also Canadians. There are too many Canadians who are apathetic, who say, oh, I don't do politics, or, oh, that's too complicated for me, or there's so much negative in the world, I don't want to go there. Well, you know, it just doesn't hold water, pardon the pun, because Canadians have a very false security about their drinking water. And the next slide will show you, I saw a question in a chat about were there asbestos cement pipes still in use? Yes, they're in use. This 14,000 kilometers are still in use, and that's only probably 2/3 of what exists in the country. So you can find out your community all across the country, thanks to the work of Prevent Cancer Now, of where your asbestos pipes are. Just put in PCN, Prevent Cancer Now, ask the question, where are Canada's asbestos cement water pipes? And you will be led to a fabulous spreadsheet that tells you exactly how many kilometers. And I encourage everybody participating to start contacting their municipal leaders, start asking difficult questions, ask for proof that the pipes have been removed and not left in the ground to create toxic waste sites. And then, of course, huge thanks to Penny for all you've done. And it's the National Council of Women of Canada who have the open letter to Prime Minister Carney to protect our water, and by doing so, that we must have equal national drinking water regulations, equal to what they have in Europe. I know there are constitutional challenges with that, but they can be creative. They can set the same standards. And that open letter, we encourage everybody to please sign, please share it with your networks, because only when enough people get concerned can we effect change.
Shannon, can you put the links in the chat, please?
I'm going to guess that there are quite a few questions in those chats. I've only managed to see a few, as I find it hard to multitask in this role. But yes, I think we should throw it open now to as many questions as we can, unless there's anything else from you, Meg, that I've skipped over in the asbestos cement pipes.
No, I think this is tremendous. We are waiting right now and since we are awaiting Health Canada's latest on whether or not it's a good idea or safe to drink asbestos, right now would be a good time to contact your MP and express your concern about Canada's kind of lackadaisical approach to this issue, and also the urgency, because we know from around the world, and we know from Regina, we know that we're getting into a worse and worse situation. We're at the very end of the lifespan of these pipes. If we don't replace them now and take them out and put in new pipes, then it's only going to get worse. And we don't want to be in the same situation as Regina, where they can barely keep up with all of the breakages and the floods. And every time there's a breakage and a flood, that's putting asbestos onto the landscape. That's going to dry. It's going to be into the wind. It's going to be dust. So, you know, it isn't as if it's just a pipe break. It doesn't matter. This is an asbestos pipe break. So it's introducing asbestos into your environment right on your street. And so there's actually an urgency now, because this is only getting worse, and it's more than we can afford. It's more than Regina.
Can I ask Meg to stop sharing and we can enter into the little bit more of a conversation? Wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shannon, can you pin both Susan and Meg, please, for everybody? I think that's possible. Do we have people like to raise their hands actually also if they want to take pose a question? And I don't know if John's still here, if he wanted to jump in with a few comments as well. Thank you for doing that. One of the questions that I did see was somebody had answered, sorry, can't remember who it was, but biosolids in the watershed, the impact of that on people's health. That was one of the questions that came up.
And that was from June Ross, and June is the chair of the Vancouver Island Water Watch Coalition. That is occurring here on the island because the city of Victoria, I'm not quite sure how it happened, but they've come up with this solution because they had too much sewage, that they are calling it now biosolids. And I'm not sure of the exact process that it's gone through. It's some kind of incineration process, but they have managed to convince the city of Nanaimo that Victoria's biosolids should be dumped all along the Nanaimo River. I mean, I just wonder where people's brains are.
Yeah, definitely. Does anybody have any questions that they want to put up? I think you covered so much and everybody is in a state of shock, as indeed am I. I mean, I live here in Montreal. You had actually informed me in the past about this research, and thank you to Giselle for putting in the link to his research in the chat. One question I do have is that my understanding is that when it comes to systems for cleaning our water, that there are only 2 centers in Canada that actually are top of the line. Am I correct in that, Susan?
In water treatment process and water treatment facilities, yes, there's 2. We have one on the island. I believe the other one might be in Quebec, and they are state of the art. They are the only 2 in Canada that will guarantee that they remove PFAs and or pharmaceuticals. Now, there are 40 more communities who have that same system. It's called the IBROM. It's what my ex-husband created. It's in 40 First Nation communities in Saskatchewan, and it's working without a hiccup after 20 to 30 years, being run by very passionate Indigenous people, and is still totally effective today.
But it's not running in Montreal.
No, and it's not running in the majority of communities across the Canada. And the people, I think it was Water Canada did an article on this 6 months ago and said that it was due to the cost of the membranes. Well, you can look at the cost of the membranes. I would say that's a heck of a good deal because they've run for 20 or 30 years, not let PFAs or pharmaceuticals into their communities. They are state of the art. They are ahead of anything. So when you look at the cost of healthcare and the cost of sickness and the lost work time and so forth, I think the price of those membranes is fantastic.
Yeah, that
But you
doubles
can,
back.
industry can do whatever they like because without those membranes, they require a huge amount of chemicals. The average community of 300 people saves $100,000 a year in chemicals by going with this membrane process.
I'm gobsmacked is the word I want to use.
I know, I use it all the time.
And that actually, goes back to what you were saying, Meg, and thank you so much for your presentation, both of you. I thank our
There is
guests.
one question.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Thank you. Go ahead quickly with the question.
Is that for me? I have a question.
Yes.
Thank you once again, first of all, to the NCW putting it together, and you 2 ladies have been amazing. It's very depressing and frightening, and we had to hear it, and I think it was beautifully presented. Very quick question. The filters that we use, for example, the Brita filters for filtering the water, the tap water, has any research been done on that, and what is it actually removing? Is it removing some of these dangerous things that are in our drinking water?
You want to go first, Meg, or do you want me to chip in?
To the best of my knowledge, the Brita filter will remove certain organic compounds,
Okay.
but they're not good with for the PFAS, and they're also not very well tested. They're not well fitted, and so on. So it's they will take out some of the chlorine byproducts, but It's not exactly, I don't think it's the same as membranes for, well, I know it's not the same as membranes for really filtering out at a molecular level what you want and don't want.
And would that be the same for those big bottles that people that have those machine, that they buy it? Would that be better? Some of my family members are using those. I'm thinking so much of our grandchildren and great nieces and nephews. This is, I mean, terrible.
I'd like to chip in with a couple of points here. First of all, when we were actively running the Safe Drinking Water Foundation, the producers of Brita offered $5,000 around the year 2000 to endorse the Brita filter. So Hans at that time did research on the Brita filters and found that they were absolutely of zero value in his mind. And his reply to Brita filters was that if you gave me $5 million, I would not endorse your product. I would not endorse your product.
Wow.
And I'm going to add something else to you, because you can put whatever system you like. You can put reverse osmosis under your kitchen sink and your bathroom sink and what have you. But are you never going to drink water anywhere other than in your home?
Of course.
Because it only takes a mouthful of water. So whatever you invest in your home is futile if you're going to drink coffee or eat salad or a juice in somebody else's home or somewhere else. It's not about your water. When I was writing this book, people said, oh, but my water's okay. Well, it's not about your water, my water. It's about our water. And it's about, we all have a right to safe water. And that can only be by protecting our source waters and stopping the contamination and pollutants.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Yeah.
And if you're the sort who would be saying it's all about my water and me, we all pay for healthcare.
Yeah. Good point. Thank you, ladies.
I think we'll pass it now to Gracia.
There is another question
okay.
by Megan. Are there any current advocacy efforts or groups beyond this that are working with government or against to address these specific concerns locally, for example, on Vancouver Island?
Well, June Ross posed the question, Vancouver Island Water Watch Coalition. I'm trying to get out there with news on the island. That's where I live, in Qualicum Beach. I don't know where you are. I'm happy to meet with you. We need people to step up. We need people to contact us and say, I want to be a part of this. I'm disturbed by what's happening. What are we going to do? We need you to contact your MPs, contact your MLAs. I spoke to an MLA for Nanaimo on Earth Day, and Sheila Malcolmson, and I congratulated her on having one of the only 2 highly effective water treatment systems in Canada. She didn't know she had a water treatment system in her jurisdiction. Yeah. That is how uneducated and uninformed they are.
Okay, now I am going to pass it over to Gracia. Gobsmacked is definitely the word.
I think Victoria, that area, was one of the worst dispensers of their waste into the water for quite a few years. So
it's not just happening there. That's just an example. This is happening across the country. You've got to start asking difficult questions of the people who are in positions of power.
Okay, my job is to thank you two. I've been the environment commissioner on and off since 1978, and I'm the VP this time. And it is a wake-up call for us, for sure. And I have read your book, Water Confidential, all 300 and something pages. Absolutely excellent. It is it's a truly intriguing book, and it has all the drama of the crisis, and then it has some light spots where you have communities that are making a difference as examples. So I urge you all to read them, and I thank you again for coming on in person so that I could meet the author and meet Meg, who's been involved with these things for years. Thank you.
Yes,
that's
thank you very much.
Thank you. And I just have a few closing words as well. And honestly, all of you, this has just been extraordinary. And I really like the word Godsmack. That's how I feel. And I have read the book, and I've actually been able to read the next one, which is on its way out at the moment. So those are both, links to them are on our website as well. I think what's really important is that people recognize that their voice is going to matter in this. If you do care, it is important that you speak to your MPs. It is important that you sign this open letter and become more informed. And I really ask that you reach out to your communities as well. Whether you're a member of the National Council of Women of Canada, whether you belong to some community group, this information needs to be shared. It's not fun sharing difficult news. But, and as Susan began and Meg also mentioned, I mean, they're just sharing the facts. And this is really important. It's difficult to grasp, but I'm asking that you go on our website. I believe Shannon has put the links in the chat. Each and every one of you will be receiving an email from us as a follow-up with a link to the full recording. In that email, you will be given the opportunity, if you're not a member, to join us. We need people with passion to join us in this work. And we touch on many different areas, not exclusively environmental ones. And this particular event obviously intersected with, raising awareness and education and health. But we also, work in terms of violence against women. There are many different areas it's an umbrella organization that's been around for 133, almost 134 years. And we're going to keep going. We've gotten rid of our long skirts. We're moving with the times. So in that email, you will get some more information. And those of you who are members of the council, I'd like to remind you, we have our AGM on May 30th. But this has been an extraordinary event, and I thank each and every one of you who stuck it out through to the very end. And onwards. Then it's just great working with you, Susan. Wonderful to meet you, Meg.